Hello and welcome to the shed. In today's video I'm going to be showing you how to sharpen these L-shaped blades in a traditional record or Stanley style router plane. I wasn't going to make this video, but it came up while I was working on the cabinet door for the cupboard back here, which is taking longer for me to get done than I thought. I've had a lot of setbacks, including injuring my knee, so yeah, that video is going to come out soon, so I'll be getting it done very soon. So let's jump down here and I'll talk you through a few different methods in which we can actually sharpen the router plane. I've got quite a few different ways and options here to show you. So what I might do first up is I'll show you with my normal sharpening setup how I would go about it, but I'm not going to sharpen it. I'm actually going to sharpen this using the most basic form here, which is actually just sandpaper on a stick, and we'll get to that in a minute. First of all, to remove the blade out of this, you need to undo this collar just here and then slide. There's a little slot up on the top here. You want to slide that off and carefully bring the blade out through the bottom. I'm going to be just doing a quick sharpening on here on this setup. I would obviously press this down, and I'm not going to worry too much about the base. That's just for removing a burr, and so I would come in here and find the angle and then actually run it back and forwards. Now the only problem you have with this setup, which is why I decided to show starting up with one of these setups, is when you come to these middle ones, you can't really get in and use them unless you're hanging just in a little spot off here, so you don't get the best sharpening. So let's get this out of the way. So if you're using sharpening stones, and these are the exact same grits as what I have on that granite block there for my sharpening setup, which is 400, 800 and 1200 approximately. Now the reason we need to lift this up is we need clearance to allow the hook part of this blade to get in here, and so we can actually run it like this. So we would come in, you'd line it up like normal, watch for it pushing the fluid in front of the blade, and you can run it like this, feel for your burr. Like so, and just keep going. Now the only problem I find with doing this is you end up with having all sorts of weird angles on the bevel, which is not ideal. And in comes things like these diamond paddles here, which run from super fine all the way up to coarse, and I'm not sure on the exact grits of these ones, but I usually just stay in that fine to medium unless there's a lot of work required on the bevel to actually sharpen it. Now remember with these that even if you do have some angles all over the place on the bevel like I do here, that doesn't really matter as long as you've got a nice sharp bit right on the very tip, because that's where the cutting's done. But ideally we'd like a sort of one facet bevel, just a primary bevel on there. So we can use these, or we can go ahead and if you don't have the diamond paddles, we can just use some 120 grit sandpaper on one side and some 240 on the other side. Now for this, I'm going to get that scrap block we had again, and we're going to move over to the vise. So when it comes to these, we could hang it off here and we can come on an angle like this, we can eye it off and we can just start sharpening like this, and you're actually going to get a pretty good sharpen if you do it with this process. Because you can actually look and engage the entire thing, watch the scratch pattern, and very easily you're going to be able to sharpen this and get a perfect even bevel, feel for your burr, remove that burr afterwards. Then you come on with the fine. Now, if you're not confident with judging your angle, just looking at it and making sure that it sits flat, because this is such a narrow bevel, we can benefit of using this block, and I'm just going to switch to a smaller paddle here because you really want a shorter paddle to actually show this process. So we're going to drop this block down, and what we're looking to do is match the angle here and then lift the block up so that we actually can go side to side like this and match our bevel. So it's a little bit of a faff around until you get that right, and you want to get down right under it and make sure you really match it. So now that looks like I've got it about right. And I'm going to check both sides just to ensure that I'm matching that angle right. And then the process is you can go back and forwards like this. Now, you can 100% put a little bit of Sharpie or metal layout fluid on that bevel so you know that you've got a nice, even, clean sharpening. For me, I just watch the scratch pattern because I start with that rougher scratch pattern so I can see when that's right along, and then each scratch pattern is quite easy to actually see. Now, if we look at this, you'll see the end of that doesn't look 100% square. But that looking 100% square is not what I'm looking for. I'm just looking to sharpen the bevel because I already made sure that it was square and coplanar to my router plane, and you will want to watch that video for setting these up initially. It's square doesn't matter as long as it's coming in evenly, and as you bring your router plane in, you want the blade to evenly engage the surface. So if it's a little bit out of square, that doesn't matter in this case. We just want it engaging parallel and at the exact same time across the entire blade with the sole of the router. So that's what I've done there, and you will want to watch that video, so do check that out down below, because otherwise your router's never going to work 100% the way you would like. It'll always engage one side before the other, and that gets frustrating. So in order to remove the burr, in some cases your strop might be able to remove it. If it's a little more stubborn, what I like to use is just my finest stone, so I just come in. Now in this case this is a 1200 grit. You could use your 140 grit sandpaper, but I think that's a little coarse, so you might be better off having a couple of sticks like this and maybe just getting some finer up to maybe 1000 or 1200 grit wet and dry or something like that you can do a final polishing with. But most of the work's going to be done on the strop, so now I'm going to strop the bottom of the blade first with about 20 strokes. Now I do have a loose strop here somewhere, but I've misplaced it at the moment, so that's what I would actually use for the bevel. When I've got it up on the block, you can actually just use a loose strop, but in this case you can just come in like a chisel. Of course you've got to run it off the side and angle it a little bit, pull that back about 20 times. Now that's looking nice and shiny, and the way that I test this is I bring it onto my nail, and if it lightly grabs the nail, it means that it's got a very sharp edge. The other check you can do is get the light above it, look down on it, and if you've got no light reflecting back at you, you know you've got those two surfaces nice and flat, and it should be nice and sharp. So let's put it back in the router plane and see how well it does now. Okay, so in order to put this blade back in, we obviously want to do the reverse of how we took it out. Now, you want to hold that collar at the base, and you can see how it forms a little triangle right here. So we want to face the blade obviously towards the opening, and we want to slide that in that gap. Now, if you look up at this top end here, you can angle the blade slightly forward of the roller, then you push it back onto the roller with that little slot and do that screw up loosely, and now it won't fall out, and we've got the blade back in there. I know it's a little tricky to show you on camera, and I hope it showed up well, so if you do want to see a closer up of that, I might be able to post a few photos on a community post just to show it. So the blade is now not engaging at all, so we just drop it down. So now we're starting to pump, so I'm going to lock that down. I'm going to back it off just a touch. Now we've just skimmed the surface here, and that is actually very, very smooth. Now if I bring it down a little bit further, and if we have a close look at this, that leaves a nice smooth surface. And what I have found with the router plane, depending on the type of pine, some of them give a bit of a rough finish, On most of the hardwoods, it gives a very fine finish and it does a very good job, and I think it gives a better result on hardwoods versus the softer woods, and that's something you just got to bear in mind with the router plane. It is what it is, and I've just found at least this style works best on hardwoods, but you can get away and use it on pine, but you just got to be a little more careful and make sure you don't take too large a cut with it, because it can, on certain pines, sort of gouge it out. So there you have it, folks. There was a bunch of different ways in which you can sharpen the router plane. In my opinion, the stick method, whether it's sandpaper or the diamond paddles, is the best method, whether you're using it and eyeballing across the bevel like I showed first, or whether you use the bench to reference. Both of them work. I've used both of them. These days I just tend to eyeball it, but when I first started sharpening I was using the bench to reference the blade, and that got me started and gave me a lot more confidence, and as my confidence grew, that's where I started just eyeballing the bevel and getting confident sharpening it that way. So if you like this video, please do like it, subscribe down below. While you're down there, do sound off in the comments. Have you had trouble sharpening your router plane? You know, are these processes that you've used to sharpen your router plane blade? Or do you have a different style router plane blade, like one of the kit ones with a straight blade? I'm curious to know down below. And if you've had problems keeping your blade coplanar with the sole, as I've mentioned in this video here, do check out the video up here where I show you how to fix that problem. Bye for now.